How can notebooks from the 1970s unlock secrets about wines that you can still afford to drink today? Why would a wine economist risk life and limb to scramble over steep cliffs in ancient Georgia, over an ancient Georgian cave town, just to see where wine was made 8,000 years ago? Let me clarify up front, that is the country, not the state. What happens when you applied an advanced voting theory used in elections to wine competitions? And why does it completely change which wines should win? And why does a former aerospace executive who analyzed risks for NASA now spend his time pouring wine in tasting rooms and writing cheeky definitions for the Devil's Wine Glossary? Well, you're going to get those tips and stories with our guest, whom I'll introduce momentarily. If you're watching this video on the replay, please type the words replay in the comments and let me know where you're tuning in from, what's in your glass. And of course, if you're here with me on the live stream, I also want to hear from you. I'm Natalie McLean, and I teach online wine and food pairing classes. And you've just joined one of the most passionate groups of wine lovers who gather every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine. Now, I'm live streaming this video for the first time, but it is based on a recording for my podcast, The Unreserved Wine Talk. However, I will be here with you live, so to speak, in the comments. So get in there. Let me know what questions you're enjoying, what tips and stories, if you have any other questions that haven't been answered, and I'll respond to you, as they say, in real time. Now, just before I introduce our guest, let me say that 3 of you are going to win a copy of his terrific new book, Grape Explications. Love the title. We'll get into that. All you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and let me know you'd like to win a copy. I'll choose 3 people randomly from those who contact me. Back to our guest. Neil Hulkover. Why am I skipping on that? Sorry, Neil. Neil Hulkower is an applied mathematician and freelance writer living in McMinnville, Oregon. By the way, Neil, this part gets edited out, and I put a new intro on each one, so I will be smoother with that. He's been writing about wine since the early 1970s and has contributed to the Journal of Wine Research, the Journal of Wine Economics, the American Wine Society Wine Journal, the Oregon Wine Press, Practical Winery and Vineyard, Wine Press Northwest, the Slow Wine Guide USA, the World of Fine Wine magazine, which is a gorgeous magazine, by the way, as well as several leading wine websites. So he's quite prolific. Neil is a member of the American Wine Society, the American Association of Wine Economists, and the Circle of Wine Writers. He has just published his first book, Grape Explications, and he joins me now from his home in McMinnville, Oregon. Welcome, Neil. We're so glad you could join us.
Thank you, Natalie, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too, Neil. We are recording this just after New Year, although we will be publishing it a little bit after that, but not long after. All right. So, what was the most surprising insight you discovered while writing this book, Neil?
So the book is a compilation of articles that I've written over 50 years, and what struck me as I went through it and did my own light editing is how much my writing has changed about wine, what topics I thought were important.
In what ways has it changed?
So, between the time I first started drinking wine until the present, last article in there was written in 2024. My palate changed, my location changed, all reflected in the topics that I covered. But quite honestly, I think I became a better writer with practice. I was always complimented on my writing, but I think it's gotten more refined as a result of doing it more, but also reading marvelous wine writers who I'd love to talk about. I do a lot of book reviews, as you know, and
You do.
and I do get to read some marvelous prose about wine, which become models for me in my own writing.
That's terrific. Wow. So yeah, yeah, it's a good survey of your writing and how you've changed as a writer, and I'm sure as a person. What was the most difficult part about writing the book?
So the a lot of the material was already written, at least in some form, and I went through and edited and so on. There's a whole culture surrounding, as you know, the creation of a book, and I had to learn that. So I read materials, I did research. I settled on a publisher, Luminary Press in Eugene, Oregon. The book is a complete Oregon product, by the way. And they were terrific, but the process of vetting potential publishers and then conforming to their process to produce a gorgeous looking book, quite frankly, I can show you
You have it
here.
there. All
I have it
right.
right there.
Okay, and
This
so
is the
for those of you who are
paperback.
listening, we'll put a link in the show notes as well as the cover page, an
Sure.
image. Yeah,
This is the
that's beautiful.
paperback. There's also a hardback and an ebook and so on. My goal was, of course, to produce something. It's considered self-published, but my goal was to have it indistinguishable from a conventionally published book, and I think Luminary Press wildly succeeded in that.
They are
Uh,
they have a great reputation, and
yeah,
these days, that old snobbery about self-publishing has gone the wayside.
yes.
Really, just there's so much you can do now with a book, and even if you're with a traditional publisher, you're still having to do all that same work.
Yes.
There's not much advantage, and given that online sales are so important these days, it's not about bricks and mortar so much. I mean, more and more traditional authors are going to self-publishing, but that's a rabbit hole I won't go down.
Well,
Anyway, great job.
I also like that because I'm very picky, and I've dealt with editors that are good and editors that I had issues with. And in this particular case, I owned complete editorial control. There was nothing in that book, there is nothing in that book that doesn't reflect the way I wanted it. And,
Right.
and that was very, very important to me. One of the things I did do when I created the book was I started with the or text, not the published text, because the published text had a lot of edits that I didn't necessarily agree with. In some cases, there were errors. Once in a while, I made them. Once in a while, the editor introduced it. And it was critically important for me to straighten all that out and have it say exactly what I wanted it to. So
Right.
I'm usually in favor of self-publishing.
Yes, absolutely. And you've done so much publishing with your academic career as well and your background, which we'll get to momentarily. But let's talk about that first taste of wine. It was the Manischewitz Concord grapes,
Yeah.
wine and religious rituals. Now, I shouldn't chuckle. Everything's come a long way. But what was your impression of that wine back when you
Um,
tasted it?
Cough syrup.
Yeah, that's being
Um,
kind.
it was, it was. I'm Jewish, and it's a kosher wine, and we used it for rituals
Okay.
on Friday night for my bar mitzvah and all that kind of stuff. It's just what you had. Now, my father, who actually had a reasonable palate, once switched over from the regular Concord grape to the dry Concord grape.
Okay.
There,
Was
there
that
was
an improvement?
it was an improvement, but it still didn't make it good.
It's like
Uh,
cherry flavored cough syrup, maybe. I don't know.
yeah, the sweetness was mitigated.
Okay.
It was still Concord grape wine. I mean,
Right.
um,
Right.
now fortunately, I don't worry about kosher or anything like that, but I have relatives who do, and there is considerably better kosher wine out there that would be appropriate for rituals and so on from all over
Absolutely.
the world. So,
Yeah, they've come a long, long way, just like other categories like organic and all kinds of others, non-alcoholic. So walk us through that moment in college when you tasted your first classified growth from Bordeaux and realized that wine could be so much more than that first taste that you had.
so my first wine friend, John Nietrauer, was the one whose mother, because he was underage, like I was at the time, provisioned him with. This was in 1968 with a 61 Calon Segor and a 61 Leoville Escas.
Wow, top growths. Yeah.
Unfortunately, he died a little over 3 years ago.
Mm.
But but before he did, I asked him if he had recollection of when we cracked open one of those bottles. He didn't have the exact date, but he believes that it was when he prepared his mother's spaghetti sauce, and that we opened it up, and I believe it was the Leo Villascas. Um,
Was
it
it a good
was
match?
well, uh, it was a revelation, and it was enough. He had already had some good stuff, and he kind of walked me through what to look for.
Hmm.
The cedar notes and the fact that it was dry and balanced and lovely. Um, I have a particularly good sense of smell. I rank that above my palate, especially as I age, and I'm sure the aromas at that time really really showed me what wine could be. You know, uh,
Right.
so it was the beginning of me getting hooked for a while until we became of age in the United States. It's 21. It's still 21. I had to rely on other folks to, get me the bottles and so on. Wasn't hard. We had an older friend whose parents he lived. I believe he lived with his parents south of Chicago, and he was able to keep a stash of terrific wines there, and he would share those. And we got to taste some remarkable stuff during my early years.
Well, that's marvelous. And then you co-founded the Duncan Hines Memorial Bon Vivant Fellowship International as an undergraduate. Tell us about this delightfully named organization and what prompted you to create a tradition of drinking German Auslese for bachelor's degrees, Baron Auslese for masters, and the Trockenbaron Auslese for PhDs.
Sure. So the organization was founded, I believe, yeah, it was in my junior year. I was really underage, and the Duncan Hines comes from the fact that my co-founder, his last name was Dennis, and mine is Hulkauer, so DH, and it suggested Duncan Hines. Um, and Dennis, after after undergrad, disappeared. He was no longer active in that organization. It really didn't take off until I came back to Northwestern. I graduated in 1970, went to Texas for a year for grad school, dropped out, and then went back to Northwestern as a mathematician instead of an astronomer. And the organization came to life with a different set of players. Um, we were in various stages in our education, so bachelor's degrees, now slays it was back then, uh, even though we weren't admitting to liking sweet wines to the preference of anything else, a beautifully balanced Auslese was something we would seek out. Plus, it was affordable back then.
Right.
You have to understand that we were drinking on graduate students. It's,
Sure.
and so that was accessible. And then some of us got masters, and then I was the only one who actually finished a PhD. And we thought, well, gee, we did an Auslese for bachelor's. The next step up is beer and Auslese. Why not?
Naturally. Mm-hmm.
Then and then the PhD, which again I was the only one to actually finish. We can talk about the wine that I had if you'd like at some
Sure,
point.
sure. Which one was it and what year
So
was it?
it was the Steinberger, the 59 Steinberger Trockenbeeren Auslese. I finished in 1977. I
Oh,
had a
wow.
tasting of clarets, 59 clarets, in my tiny two-bedroom apartment, graduate housing. Invited professors, one of my friends, and we finished with this marvelous nectar.
Wow.
I have the notes here if you're interested. I can.
Sure, sure.
So these are my notebooks, by the way,
Oh,
that we
yes,
talked
want to get
about.
to those. Yes.
Yeah. So deep dark brownish apricot, which I corrected to be gold because brownish implies that it was materialized. It wasn't. Rich, intense, fruity aromas, thick, remarkable flavor, rich, thick, oily, cushy texture. Initially, a very pleasant acid tinge could be the bubbles, followed by the honeyed fruit and a depth of finish never before experienced. Maintains and glorifies the family traits exhibited by the 71 Spätlese, actually showed some secondary fermentation. Nectar with good balance, sufficient acid, fantastic.
Wow, that's a great tasting note. And you were so young, too.
Yeah, and I don't do well. I actually do. I still do tasting notes, but rarely. Um, I had already been tasting wine at that time seriously for taking notes for 7 years, so I was practiced at writing the notes. But the interesting thing is when I think about it, I can almost imagine tasting it because it was like biting into a juicy apricot,
Mm,
with the sweetness and then that beautiful acidity.
yes.
It was a truly remarkable wine. How I came across it is also interesting. Evanston was mostly dry, had no liquor stores when I was at Northwestern, and there was a wonderful wine shop that still exists on the border with Skokie called Schaefer's. That's where I spent a good part of my graduate stipend. And George Schaefer, who was the proprietor at the time, said that he had this bottle of I was looking for a Trockenbaron Auslese. He had this bottle of the Steinberger that he was willing to sell to me for the remarkable price of $85. This is a
Ooh,
lot of money in
back then, yeah.
1977. And it had just gone at auction for 200. The only condition was that I had to pour off an ounce for him, and that was a no-brainer.
Yeah.
But it was for a long time the most expensive bottle I had ever bought. $85. My stipend was, I think at that time, maybe $250 a month, something
A
like
month.
that.
Oh, wow.
I could.
Half a month.
I had a wife and a daughter. Groceries would cost $25 a week. So to give you sort of a context, $85 was a lot of money,
Hmm.
and it was worth every penny. Given that it's almost 50 years, and I'm still smiling thinking about drinking
Yeah,
it.
bet. That's quite
Yeah.
memorable. And so you've mentioned, you just showed us the notebooks, and between 1969 and 79, you kept meticulous notebooks on 450 wines in four small notebooks, recording everything from prices to tasting notes. What drove you back then? I mean, you were enraptured with wine, but as a young mathematician, why did you want to document all of these, the tasting journey versus just enjoying the wines? I'm sure you enjoyed them too,
Oh,
but
I enjoyed them.
yes.
I think it's hard to. The first notes were written in 1970, so we're looking at 56 years ago. I wanted to remember the experience.
Mm,
I think that without trying to guess all the way back, I wanted to keep a record of because this was so new to me, having graduated from Manischewitz and the the sacramental wines. Um, and the fact that it was, I have a really, as I said, I have a really good sense of smell. And it was, to me, it was another form of art that I was exposing, in particular, my olfactory senses to.
Right.
And, and, I wanted to try to capture that as well as I could in words. I think it's futile. I know you write tasting notes. I still write them for limited things, and certainly for when I have to publish something. But it's been said that there's millions of aromas and sensations and chemical reactions and so on, and
Hmm.
yet we only have a finite vocabulary to do it. So it's sort of an exercise in futility to try to reconstruct what it was like to actually taste that wine from simply reading what you wrote, or certainly what somebody else wrote. But there I was. I mean, I was a blossoming academic. You write things down, you keep track. I was a scientist, so you record lots and lots of detail. It fit my personality then. I'm still hardcore aged venerable nerd now, and I appreciate the fact that I did that. It's given me a lot of fuel for some of my writing.
Yeah, those are great memories.
Yeah.
Almost like a travel journal, but for the senses.
Yep.
So you completed your PhD in applied mathematics at Northwestern University in 1977, and then you tried your hand in academia for a while at Vanderbilt University teaching mathematics,
Yes.
correct? Okay.
Yes.
And then you decided to leave academia and you went in to quite an august business career that took you through 11 states, working at some of the most respected technology and aerospace companies, eventually becoming president and CEO of RAF Technology. How did you balance this demanding career with your growing passion for wine, or did they just naturally fit together?
So there were a number of reasons why I left academics. I had a small family to support,
Mm.
and the salary was meager. But as I tell folks, I couldn't afford wine. I
Right.
couldn't afford good wine. So I needed to, and my then wife couldn't find a job. So we were living on my meager academic salary. Um, and I had issues with getting an adjustment and so on and pay. And so we headed west to California, and I became a rocket scientist. That was the initial thing I did. I worked for Jet Propulsion Lab. All the times that I did this bouncing around, I was ratcheting up my salary. In California, of course, I became heavily exposed to California wines. That was 1977 when we moved there. No, it's 1979 when we moved there. And that was, only 3 years after the Judgment of Paris. And so
Mm.
California wines were, on everybody's radar. Quite frankly, I found them at that time to play second fiddle to the stuff I had been drinking as a graduate student, which included the classified growth clarets, the beautiful Rieslings from Germany, and in particular the Pinot Noirs from Burgundy. California Pinots couldn't hold a candle to them; they were too fruity. They lacked complexity. But I compromised and I tasted around and so on. Um, the the full-time employment enabled me to have the resources to maintain a small but growing stock of wine. It was always a hobby, but a pretty intense one. It was an excuse for socializing. I made some converts, that I could taste with. And as I moved around, some states had viable wine areas. Washington State has a beautiful wine area, and that's where I was the CEO of a small software company. I lived in Virginia, Virginia is not to be ignored. They've got some seriously good vino there, and it's progressively better. Other
That's
states,
interesting. Yeah, we
yeah,
don't get any Virginia wine up here yet, but yeah, I'm sure it's coming. That was the home of
Thomas Jefferson,
yes, who took grape plantings from Bordeaux and planted them in Monticello or something like that.
Monticello, and they
Yeah.
unfortunately didn't take, but
Uh,
there are vineyards there now that are thriving, not far, I think even at Monticello. But
okay.
um, there, when I lived there, there was some stuff that was less interesting, but now I have a daughter who still lives there, so we go
Oh,
back
okay.
and I try to pick up some examples. Um, and they're quite enjoyable. It's vinifera, it's not the hybrids. Um, and Cab Franc is very big there. Petit Manseng is now displacing Viognier as the white of choice in Virginia.
Okay.
I did a book signing in May of last year now at a winery that specializes in that, and it's pretty nice stuff. Um, so yeah, for when I lived in areas that had a wine region, it was I could pop over and check out Virginia wines. I lived in Massachusetts for a long time. I worked at the Mitre Corporation, my favorite grown-up job. Um, and there's actually a tiny wine region near the border with Rhode Island, which also has a microscopic wine region. And there's a winery in Massachusetts called Westport River Winery that makes pretty credible sparkling wines. When you think about it, sparkling wines are generally made from grapes that are slightly underripe. And given that it's cold in Massachusetts, it was a suitable place for that.
Sure.
So I popped over there a couple of times,
So you
went
learned as
into
you went, wherever your business travels took you,
precisely,
your
yeah.
wine palate followed. And then you say in 2011 you had your last full time grown up job and you moved to McMinnville and became a freelance wine writer. So, describe that transition from sort of analyzing risks for billion-dollar government programs to analyzing whether, Pinot shows a whole cluster fermentation character or whatever. Like, or did it just sort of naturally evolve that way?
There, yes, and there was a bit of random walk, from
Mm-hmm.
topic to topic. Um, so the transition the transition was that they converted me from a full time. I was a vice president of uh, technical something or other. I had some fancy title. Got to be too expensive. Converted me to a consultant. I did some consulting back there, and I said, "Good, I don't have to live in Virginia anymore." We had bought our place in Oregon in 2009, and we're coming out here part time. I worked here. I'm in my office right now, where I work back at in Virginia, and we said, okay, so we sold our place in Virginia. We had this place. We came over, and I said, now I'm going to get the permit to try to go and work in tasting rooms and start applying for that. And I said, I'm going to write because what happened. I guess I should rewind back to 2009. There was a hiatus between about 1977 when I published my last article in now defunct Vintage magazine and when I started writing about wine. In between I wrote about all kinds of things. I have a large list of publications, reports and so on technical matters and the various things that I did for my job and so on. But in 2009 um, we went to see the movie Bottle Shock, and at that time, I had been uh, interested in what's called a board account, which is a way of aggregating preferences, and it's actually the way we should vote, but we can talk about that separately. Um, the reason I got into it is my dissertation advisor, Don Sari, got into it after I finished my PhD. My PhD, just for the record, was in a field called celestial mechanics, which is the mathematical modeling of the motion of heavenly bodies.
Wow.
And my topic was the zero energy three body problem. Anybody who's watching this may have seen the Netflix
Yeah, the
three
three
body
body
problem.
problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to be too picky, but that was actually a restricted four body problem, but who's counting? Um,
Apparently you are, as a
I was.
mathematician.
Yeah, yeah. So, long before that, I did that and I solved a 90-year-old problem. Celestial mechanics is a particularly difficult field. Newton basically started it, and the problems, all the easy problems were solved, and what's left are really, really hard problems. So, not letting many people go into this. Don went on while I was there. He got interested in mathematical economics, and he started looking at voting methods. So he proved some of the central theorems that show the uniqueness of the board account. Um, and I got interested in that. And when I was at the MITRE Corporation, I had him out to talk. Some of the people in my organization, I was a department head in the Economic and Decision Analysis Center there for a while. Some of the people applied that to some of our work, and I was watching this movie, and I was wondering how they came up with the ranking for the
The
whites
bottle
and the
shock,
reds.
not
And
not the
bottle
three
shock, yeah,
body problem.
back to bottle shock, yeah.
Bottle shock. And was this based on the 1976 Judgment of Paris, Tasting in Paris?
Yes,
That movie?
yes, it
Okay.
was, but only
Okay.
the whites. He only focused on the
Ah.
whites.
Okay.
There's an interesting thing that there's a book by George
George
Tabor,
Tabor. Yes.
who
Judgment of Paris. Yeah.
Judgment of Paris, and he was trying to make a movie at the same time this came out
Oh.
on
Okay.
that. There was some noise that it was going to happen, but then it never happened. So I'm watching this movie and saying, I wonder how they came up with the ranking.
Right.
Border was on my mind. Wine is always on my mind. And this was my very first opportunity to bang the two together.
Right.
So I started doing research. I got in touch with George Tabor. I got his book, which is marvelous. Um, and I collected all of the, as much as possible, the original data. Um, and I redid it using the board account. So the issue is that the way they came up with the ranking is that each of the judges on a 20-point scale ranked a wine. And then
They
they
gave it a
added up,
score out of 20?
yeah, it was, 0 to 20,
Okay.
not 100.
Right.
This is more like what Jancis Robinson uses.
Yes.
She uses a 20-point scale. I think there were some crude guidelines given for them, but the numbers were all over the place. And when you add up the scores like that, somebody who scores, say, everything between 90 and 100, there are no 100-point wines, has a disproportionate influence on the final sum than somebody who rates in the 80s.
Right.
Okay, this violates one judge, one vote. Now, there's a whole controversy as to whether or not that's a bad thing. I happen to think it's a bad thing. So I said, can fix that. And I sat down and I converted the scores to rankings, aggregated them using the board account, and came up with a different outcome for the red.
Wow. And just to step back for a minute,
Sure.
I don't have your math background, but Borda, if I understand it in a crude way, says that every judge just gives a like a first, second, third, fourth, fifth, or whatever, like just a numeric ranking, not a score out of 20 or whatever. But, each wine gets one, like if you've got 20 wines, there's going to be one first place wine, one second place wine, one third, and that gets a standard number of points so that it's the same across each judge rather than the loud voice, the person who scores 99 for everything, having the scales tipped in their favor for the winners.
Precisely, although there is a way of doing Borda that allows ties, and in this conversion from the scores to the rankings, there were in fact wines that had the same scores, so that translated into the same ranking. Basically, what you do is you average those so-called Borda scores. So if you have 10 wines, the top ranked wine gets 9 points, second 8, all the way down to 0. You can actually do it with 10, 9, 8, 7 all the way down to 1, but we do, it doesn't change the outcome. What's critical is that spacing has to be exactly the same. Any change in that spacing um, distorts the outcome.
Right.
And so when I did that, the 1970 Haut-Brion came in first place, and the Stag's Leap, which was advertised to be in first place, came in a close second. In the
Ah,
whites, the Montelena persisted in first place.
okay.
Now, down the column, there were also little puts and takes. So I wrote this all up. Um, there were some nuances relating to the fact that some of the original scores for the whites were lost, and so there was some slight discrepancy, minor. And this really gets into nerdy stuff that we don't have to get into. But I said this is novel. Nobody's come up with this before. They've done statistical studies, and we can get into that too. But nobody did applying the Borda count to it. So I wrote it up, sent it into the Journal of Wine Research, and it was published. It's a referee journal, went
Mm-hmm.
through rigorous peer review, and it was published. So now I was back in the wine writing business, banging together my two loves, math and wine.
Right.
It's like,
Right.
yay, it was great.
Yay.
Um, then I said, okay, most people who love wine don't read the Journal of Wine Research. And when I moved to Oregon, before we moved to Oregon, we would come out here and sort of reconnoiter and so on. And there's this nice publication called the Oregon Wine Press, and monthly, nice, very nice publication. And I said, I'd like to write for them. And the first thing I published was in 2011, shortly after we became permanent Oregon residents. And it was called Borda is Better. And I call it the Golden Book version of my piece in the Journal of Wine Research. Then I was hooked. And so, I started looking for excuses to write. But the transition um, from Virginia to Oregon, except for the actual physical getting the house ready and so on in Virginia, was smooth. That was a 6 week hell period and so on. But we moved here, we settled in, changed our registration, said goodbye to Virginia, and I started looking again for writing gigs, and then also tasting room gigs.
And now back to that Borda, that a
Yes,
Yale statistician, Dominic Cicchetti,
yes.
launched a heated attack on using the Borda count in wine competitions. What did he disagree with there? Why did he say it wasn't the right way to choose winners and losers?
So he's a was he, unfortunately he died. It's very sad. I really like the guy. He's a biostatistician. I'm a mathematician. We're not the same. We're not cut from the same cloth exactly. And he, in fact, had written about the Judgment of Paris and analyzed the scores as a statistician, came up with the conclusion that there was essentially no difference between the first and second place. And that's mentioned, I actually mentioned his work in my paper. But what he doesn't like is the fact that, let me give you a version of his example, which I think is absolutely brilliant to show the distinction between his perspective and one that's strictly ordinal. He has an example where he has um, five tasters rank, I think, three wines. One of them has scores, not ranked, but scores three wines. One of them has scores in the 60s, two in the 70s, and two in the 90s. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
those clearly show three different levels of goodness for the wines. Okay, if you convert those to rankings and use Borda, that intensity of preference disappears.
Right. That this
Okay,
wine is so much better than that wine. The wine that were
the
scored in the
90s,
90s.
the
Yeah.
guys who ranked in the 90s thought so much more of those wines than the guys
Than
in
the
the
60s.
70s,
Right.
and so much who thought more of it than the guys in the 60s. That information is lost.
Right.
Okay, now he was of the school that there were people whose opinion should count more.
More. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm not,
Right.
and so there was some difference there. But um, in dealing with his objection, which is, it's a reasonable objection. Um, there were two different things that I suggested over time. One is you can actually introduce with Borda, and I wrote a separate peer-reviewed paper on this called Power of None, the Power of None. You can introduce none as an option, and you can insert that anywhere in the ranking, which would then
What does the none mean? Like zero? Like
zero. Well,
okay.
that it if you have, let's let's talk in terms of political candidates without mentioning names because it's a little bit easier. Suppose you have a slate of candidates that you have to choose from and you don't like any of them, but you're in a jurisdiction where you have to rank them because we have that now in the United States. Poorly done, but we have it. You should be able to say none as your option.
That you don't want to vote for
You don't want
anybody.
to take them, and then
Okay.
have everybody else ranked underneath that, either equally or
Yeah.
So the paper that I wrote with my friend John Nietrauer, who got me into wine, examines that in great detail and the implication. Um, Generically, it doesn't specifically call out elections, but it can also be used for wine. So suppose that the folks who ranked the wine, the gentleman who, or the judge who ranked the wine in the 60s, really didn't like any of them, but was compelled to rank them, he
Mm-hmm.
could put in none as the first and rank the others
Right.
underneath.
Right.
Whereas those in the 90s would have none at the bottom because they liked all of them, right?
Yes.
Guys in the 70s might have none in between.
Okay.
And then you aggregate and none turns up where it is,
Right.
okay,
Okay.
in the overall ranking.
And
There,
because if there were three judges who all said none for all of them, maybe that would that avoid wine competitions not giving like it
yes,
seems to me sometimes wine competitions give a medal to everybody just for participating.
right.
So if it's a weak category, you're going to get a gold if you're the best in a weak category. Whereas this, it seems, would say,
Nope,
actually, nobody measured up. There shouldn't be
right.
medals given out for this one.
Yes, that's precisely what it can do. But
Okay.
I don't know if you want to get into this now, but very recently in this past year, a colleague, a wine economist colleague of mine, Jeff Boddington, came up with, I think, a brilliant way to handle this, and it's called stars and bars.
Okay.
Um, Very simply, let's go back with a very simple example. Let's say that there are three judges, and using the board account, they there's a wine that gets a total Borda score of 9.
Mm-hmm.
So how can you get to 9? Well, each one gave it a Borda score of 3. You could have a Borda score of 1, 1, and 7.
Right.
You could get 4,
Yeah.
4, 5, and 0.
It's
And
dragging
so on.
everybody down to an average or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what's really important here? What was the thing that Dom was objecting to? He was objecting to the fact that a ranking is simply that. It doesn't give you any sense of the strength of preference
Mm.
with that ranking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So none works, sorta. You still have the issue of strength of preference, although the place in the final ranking is a strength of preference. What's nice about stars and bars and the analysis that Jeff came up with is that it adds a second dimension beyond simply the ranking, and that dimension is the strength of preference. If all three of them gave that wine 3, that's stronger than if two of them gave 1 and one gave 7. There's a
Okay.
there's a spread there, which means, yeah, the one guy who might be a super taster or not, again, I don't believe in it, but some folks do, really loved that one. The others two said, no, doesn't do it for me. So there's a wider distribution. If you had, um, two two twos and a 5, that's a little tighter. You get the picture that
Sure.
if you look at how that ranking of 9 is arrived at and how it can be arrived at, that gives you another piece of information that can help you appreciate how strong a preference that wine was appreciated
Right.
by the judges.
Huh. Fascinating. Wow. And here I thought, well,
But
I
you
dropped math
understood me,
early.
right?
It's like, yes, I did. I understand it.
Yeah,
Just
it's
just
not that
barely.
hard.
I almost don't want to touch it though.
Okay.
It's like, no, I get it. I get
I
it.
hear you.
I'm more of a lit major, but anyway. So you applied that as well to the judgment of Paris, the Borda
Yes,
method,
we applied right
and
to
got
Borda.
similar results.
Yes.
But let's go on to the conference where you received one of the 3 coveted Christoph Barron prizes for best conference presentation in Tbilisi, Georgia, the
country.
country, not the state.
Yeah.
It was what can I still afford to drink? Now, what was this? This was a different topic, correct?
Yeah, this is, I bounce around a lot.
Okay.
I joke that I have a short attention span. I can be proven, that can be disproven. So these notebooks here that I, you know, talk about,
Yes.
provided me remarkable data on my tasting history between 1969 and 1979. And I said, gee, I drank some fabulous stuff back then. Classified grows, aged Burgundies. You could pick up a 25-year-old Burgundy for $19.
Well, those are
Granted,
the
it's still
days.
a lot of money, but you could
Still.
still.
It,
And I
yeah.
said, wonder if, first of all, if any of those wines are still available, and if so, what would they cost? And if not, is there something similar that's out there, similar age that I could afford? Um, so this was originally an article that I wrote for Wine Searcher, and it came out under the name of, I think, The Cost of Tasting Wine History or something like that. And I said, gee, it's kind of fun. I like my title better than the one that was given,
I do
but
too.
yeah. Um, uh, and I like giving talks at the wine economist meeting. I said maybe I should do this. So I wrote it up, um, COVID hit, the meetings were canceled. I didn't go to Vienna, and so I dug it out. Did another talk that where I used Borda to look at the tasting that resulted in Domaine Drouhin happening in Oregon. And so I had two talks in Tbilisi. Um, it I did an analysis. I went through Wine Searcher again to see what was available, how much it cost, did all of my, descriptive statistics. And then I also had my current inventory, which I keep in a spreadsheet. And I looked at the maximum price I paid for a bottle of wine. And I said, okay, that represents the limit. Empirically, this is the most I paid, and that's the most I'm willing to pay. And then I took a look to see what else was available that I was at that or below that price. Turned out there was some. Anything that wasn't exactly what I had, and it could have been because it would have been over the hill, or too expensive, or I looked for something of comparable age for when I had it. And I did the same kind of thing. I looked to see if it fell under that number.
Wouldn't
Um,
they have all increased though? Wines of at least decent wines of the vintage you had in your stockpile, wouldn't they have
yes.
all gone up?
Yeah, but there were a couple that didn't, and also I'm sure you're familiar with Wine Searcher. That's a dynamic website, so you can go back an hour later and things change. When I wrote the article, I did the analysis, and then when I did the article, when I did the presentation, I went back and did the analysis all over again. Things indeed had changed. That Trockenbeer Auslese, which of course could survive the number of years, was instead of 885 or $200, I think initially it was $3,600. And then when I looked at it again, it had dropped a little bit, possibly because it was fading. I don't know.
Sure.
Um,
Huh.
and that's not what I would pay for a bottle of wine. Um,
So did
so
that make you
yeah,
say I should never open it, or that, like, what
well, I
was your
think you should
conclusion?
open it because it's not, it could be, 59. That's a long time ago.
Yeah, it could be
It could
going
be
down.
going down. I mean,
Yeah,
it would still be awfully good,
right.
you know. We did,
So,
by the way. I'm sorry. We
oh,
did,
go ahead.
by the way, have a bottle of that 70 O'Brien to celebrate the publication of the paper. I was actually able to acquire one that was in good shape for a reasonable amount of money. It was 39 years old when we opened it,
Wow.
and I still have the bottle, and I framed it along with the reprint of the article, and then my friend John's comments on it. It was terrific, but it was definitely starting its decline.
I'll bet. How much did you have to pay for it?
I think it was 200 or something like that. It
That's a
wasn't
deal.
outrageous.
Yeah.
It was not outrageous.
Bordeaux. Yeah.
Um, and
Wow.
I was shocked.
So, what was your conclusion with the presentation? What can I still afford to drink? Not much, or what
Well,
was the?
more than I expected.
Okay.
More than I expected. I'd have to, I can get back to you and send you the
Yeah,
results
no,
and
no,
so
it
on.
doesn't have to be
But
specific, but I just have
but
this vision that Bordeaux, Burgundy, they've all gone crazy, even in the last
German
5, 10 years.
wines don't. German
Ah,
wines don't.
huh.
And again, using that thing, what would it cost for me to get a 15-year-old claret or German wines versus the one that I had when it was 15 years old, but it was from, I don't know, 1947 or whatever
Mm.
it was. Would have been later, but I used that also, and there was enough. There was enough. There was still some things that I won't touch. Um, the the most expensive bottle of wine I ever paid for was a wine to celebrate my 75th birthday, which was in 24. I happened to be in London at the Hedonism Wine. doing some research for an article on Chardonnay, Oregon Chardonnay.
And what's Hedonism Wine? Is it a wine shop?
It's a wine shop in
Okay.
Mayfair,
Ah,
and if you're ever there, you should go.
yeah, it's beautiful neighborhood too, Mayfair. It's
Yeah,
quite hoity posh, as they
it's
say.
very
Quite posh.
posh, and two stories. And I'm done, doing the interviews for my thing. I said, I have a big birthday coming up, and do you happen to have any 49s that will not require me mortgaging my house? And so they popped up on the screen, and there was this 70 that was in fact 250 pounds. I said, okay. And they pulled up two of them, and we, sitting there looking at them at the ullage and so on.
Right?
And I pick one bottle. That translates to $316
American.
and
Add
American,
30% Canadian.
not Canadian. And we got it. And again, we wish we gotten both because
It was great.
it was fabulous.
Oh, wow.
And
And
we
the
were
ullage, that's the part, the oxygen space between the cork and the where the wine comes up to on the shoulder of the bottle. How is that? Was it?
it was that it was well above it was practically normal.
Oh, okay, great. Because that
The
will
bo-
give you an indication of oxidation if there
yeah,
is any. Yeah.
and that's my sole criteria. Well, pretty much my sole criteria now when I'm buying something old. Because I got burned for my 70th birthday. I got one where it was too low and the wine we choked it down, but it
Uh,
was pretty much
right.
gone. We should have gotten both. The wine was acquired from the cellar of a collector who probably got it when it was released.
Right.
So that
Great
would have been,
Providence. Yeah.
yeah, 1951. We picked the one with ever so slightly higher, uh, you know,
The fill.
fill,
Yeah.
and we should have just bought both because there's enough life there for at least another, I'd say another 5 years. Could have made it to my 80th,
Well,
but
the memories will last till then or
yeah,
longer.
yeah,
Yeah.
the wine held up. We didn't decant it. We got the cork out intact, which took about 10
Remarkable.
minutes.
Oh, really? Did you use that tong kind of? I forget what they're called. That
They call
specialty
it
cork.
they call it a Durand,
Oh,
but
that's right.
rather than pay $150 for a Durand, I saved the screw from a rabbit thing contraption that I had,
Yeah.
slipped it into that which you hang shades up with. So those are the wings. Manually screwed it in. And I was working with a colleague from the tasting room who was stronger than I am. And then we went around with an ASO, which is
And
how a
also,
Durand works.
right. Only an aerospace engineer could come up with
Yeah,
that.
it worked. It worked, and it didn't. And I saved the $150 for bottles of wine. Um, and
That
and
sounds.
it was delight. I mean, you
Yeah.
usually worry about a wine that old decaying. It actually over the hour got a little better,
Really.
and by the time it was gone, it was pretty damn good.
Ugh. And was it mainly structure, tannin, and acid, or did it have any
No,
fruit left?
it had complexity. One of the things that changed in my palate over the year is that I don't crave fruit.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer savory elements to a
Sure.
wine. Um, or things like truffle,
Right.
you know,
Mushroom, the forest floor, those things that
mushrooms,
come through over time. Yeah.
yeah, umami characteristics and so on. This had that. There's a word I use for wine. I've seen somebody else use it too, especially ones that are venerable. Wisdom. The wine acquires wisdom.
Wisdom.
Yeah, it's not brash. It's not in your face. It says, sit with me for a while and let's have a olfactory, conversation. Watch me as I change. Um, and this wine did that. As fragile as it might have been, it changed. It came back to the beginning of conversation, and then it went someplace else, and so on. It was I love older wines, and I'm aging Oregon Pinots now, which can age fabulously well.
How long can they? I mean, it has to be well made, but what's the
But
potential there for well made Oregon Pinot
oh,
Noir?
20, 30 years.
Oh,
I'm
really?
I'm
Wow.
drinking 11s now,
Huh. Okay.
which was a cool vintage. I recently had a 10 that was fabulous. The oldest one recently was 20 years old, an '05. Was drinking just great.
Is that mainly because of the acidity
Acidity and tannins, right?
and
The
tannin? Okay.
structural elements are
Right.
required, the two.
Sure.
Um, and they change character. They get wise. The fruit, Oregon generally has more fruit than Burgundy, although not as much as California. There are savory elements, especially if you do things like whole cluster fermentation. Um, so the fruit becomes drier, muted, and all of these other beautiful elements come up. Um, yeah, yeah, yeah.
That sounds marvelous.
It
Now,
is.
that descriptor, which I love, wisdom, is kind of almost seemingly the opposite of another term you came up with in your Devil's Wine Glossary, a cheeky, sort of tongue in cheek definitions of wine. I probably not get this right, but kaleidofactic? Is that
Kaleidofactic. It's a word that
kaleidofactic?
kaleidofactic. It's a word that I coined, and
Yes.
so far I'm the only one who uses it. I put it out there. I wrote an article that ended up in the book, and it the reason again, being a mathematician and being anal about precision in language, because in math, the first thing you do before you try to prove theorems or come up with anything else is have an explicit definition of something,
Hmm.
right? Unambiguous, unambiguous. So people would describe an aroma as uh, kaleidoscopic. Well, I'm sorry, scopic applies to eyesight. A kaleidoscope you turn for eyesight. So I said, what would it be as the aroma changes? So I came up with this Franken word, you know.
A
Um,
portmanteau. Yes. You're
yeah,
putting them together.
well, put them together. Or
Yeah.
one actually is of Greek origin, and the other is Roman or Latin origin. I
All the
banged them
better.
together, and it sounded good. And then
Yeah.
I wrote an article about it, which ended up in the book, and I use it from time to time. It's been for a while. I was a field coordinator for the Slow Wine Guide, which forced me, as hard as it was, to taste at various wineries. And I've dropped that term when I've had a wine that really stood out. Um, and in the fact that the nose changed, so dramatically over time.
Right.
Um, it just made it interesting, to
Yeah. No, I love the word
yeah,
kaleidofactic. Um,
kaleidofactic. You can use it if you
kaleidofactic.
want to.
Thank you. If I
It's
can
a
remember how to say it correctly, and then I'll have to
kaleidofactic,
like footnote it to give you credit, the way they do in academic papers.
right?
What are maybe one or two other definitions that you came up with in the Devil's Wine Glossary that you like?
Well, there's a word that isn't in the glossary. Word war I used when I was describing British wine writing. That there's a
War? How do you spell that?
it's word with war afterwards. It's like
Oh,
terroir, only it's word war.
oh, okay.
It,
Oh, word
it
war.
yeah.
Okay.
But the other words in the Devil's Dictionary are not original to me. Um, there's there's an article in there in defense of describing wines as feminine, masculine, and sexy.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so those words are in the Devil's Dictionary. Um,
And you say you included them because, I don't know, you like to poke the bear, or at least professional offense takers. So
Yes.
what is your take on describing wines as masculine or feminine?
I, I don't like to tell anybody what to do. And the article talks about why I finally had to write that piece. There had been a piece in Wine Searcher that I found irritating, but chose to ignore it because everybody's entitled to their opinion. What
Mm-hmm.
really pushed me over the edge is when there was this whole session for the Wine Writers Seminar, which is held once a year in Napa. I don't know
Right.
if you know about it.
I do in Meadowood. Yeah.
Yeah, right,
Yep.
precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And during COVID, they put it online so anybody can attend. And
Yes.
they dedicated an entire session to, you know, picking apart people's choice of words. It was too cancel cultural ish for my
Or
taste.
war. Yes.
Yeah, it was too it was too much like, oh, you can't use that word because it offends somebody. You have to be mindful of the fact that the world is bigger and we have folks who don't know what you know gooseberries taste like, or people who don't. One of the panelists said, "I'm uncomfortable about talking about sex." Fine, I'm not talking about sex. I'm talking about wine and describing it as sexy because it's sensuous.
Sensual.
You know,
Yeah.
um, or well, what is female wine? What does a feminine wine mean?
Mm-hmm.
What does a masculine wine mean?
Mm-hmm.
Especially now when people are trying to mix up genders or divide them and so on. And I thought to myself, enough. You write you, I'll write me. If you use a word that I'm unfamiliar with or uncomfortable with, either I'm obliged to go look up the fruit that you're using to describe it with, or I say, okay, that's your opinion and this is mine. We use Typically we use words metaphorically, right?
Mm-hmm.
I also have a thing about minerality, as you
Yeah, I don't
probably.
like that term at all. And
I hate it.
several people have been on the podcast talking about it and how faux science and everything else it is. But it's a metaphor.
It's a
It's if you want to
metaphor.
use it as a metaphor, fine.
It's right, and that's fine. But really, you're obliged to tell me what it's a metaphor of, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with the feminine and masculine, after the article came out, and it was, I had somebody asked to be removed from my list who called me a toxic male, which is it couldn't be further from the truth. I have two smart, beautiful daughters, I had my department at the Miter Corporation had 40% women who were brilliant. You know, I'm the antithesis of a toxic male. Um, so I removed her from my list because that's her right. But I also had people love the article, and it wasn't just folks on the right. Um, it's folks in the tasting room who I would bring it up to, and so on. The bottom line in all of this wine language, and I have issues with tasting notes anyways, but if you're going to write them, write you. Write how you want to convey it. Realize that you may or may not resonate with somebody. Um, People who are, wrapping the whole world in political context, they get to do that, but it's not your job to cater to that. If
Sure.
they want to take offense on behalf of the nameless masses, that's their right, but it should not prevent you from using a term that's meaningful to you,
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
can convey at least your metaphor. Um, when I say
Absolutely.
masculine, I have some specific notions. When I say feminine, I do. When I say sexy, there's a sultriness to the wine that I can. It's either tactical or olfactory,
Right, right.
olfactory or something. Um,
Yeah, no, yeah, I address that in my book as well,
yeah,
because
good.
it was, as you know, you reviewed my book,
Yes, love your
and
book.
I think there is. Thank you, and I think there's a difference between when we're talking about a wine, when we're talking about a person too. So, and we get a little bit mixed up with the two. That the language can be different in different situations. But let's talk about something that I don't want to miss because this time has flown, Neil. You are very much an advocate for social justice.
Of course.
So Jesus Gillian asked you to
Guillen, yeah.
write the original article about this a big acronym. I don't even know if you say it like this, but AHIVOY. So the Association of Hispanics the wine industry in Oregon, and it was the idea was to educate vineyard workers to improve their station in life. Tell us your involvement with that organization and what it does.
Sure, this is with great pleasure. I love that organization. By the way, the acronym IVOY is
Hi, boy.
Spanish for I go.
Okay.
So that's how I think Jesus came up with it.
Okay.
Um, uh, Jesus Guillen was a winemaker at White Rose, which is the winery that I work at in the tasting room.
All
And
right.
we became very, very close friends. His brother works in the tasting room. He was a brilliant winemaker, um, fabulous guy, and he and two other Hispanic folks in the wine industry, Sofia Torres McKay and Miguel Lopez, sat down one day and said, "Okay, we made it in the wine industry. How can we help the folks, the the vineyard stewards, the folks who work in the fields, without whom there would be no wine?"
Right.
And they came up with the organization, the purpose of which is to introduce them through education to the full picture of the industry that they are at the foundation of.
Right.
And I became involved because I was doing wine writing. Jesus was a fan of my writing. And they decided at one point that they wanted to get publicity for the idea to see if they could kind of use that to gel, to actually cause the organization to be birthed. And they wrote to Hilary Berg, who was the editor of the Oregon Wine Press at the time, and said, "We want to do an article on this." And he said, "Sure, it should be somebody who can speak Spanish and so on." And I don't speak Spanish, although I tried to learn some. And Jesus said, "I want Neil to write it." So he said, "Okay." And that's how I started. So there's a very famous photographer, Andrea Johnson, who's Oregon based, who was commissioned to do the photography. And I wrote the first piece, which was published under the title Breaking Down Walls. It, it had some political meaning at that time because of who was president. But it introduced the idea. We did beautiful profiles of each of the founders. Unfortunately, this was in 2018. It came out in August of 2018. In November of 2018, just fell sick
Hmm.
with a rapidly spreading form of cancer
Oh.
called soft tissue carcinoma or something like that, and died 6 weeks later. He was
Oh.
38,
Oh my goodness.
before the organization actually came into being. Um, I was tasked with writing his obituary, which is also in the book. Um, the idea percolated. His widow, Juliana, picked up the mantle, and the three of them finally, a little less than a year, well, about a year after he died, I think Incorporated. There was then a fundraiser for it, which I covered and wrote. And the first class happened right when COVID hit.
Wow.
It started and then it stopped just before they graduated. But I covered all of this, and all of the articles are in the book. I was taken because this was a case of paying it forward, of not looking for handouts, not playing the victim, but playing the victor.
Hmm.
That we're going to take control of the circumstances. We're going to do the best thing you can for people, which is give them some education and let them pick where they wanted to be.
Sure.
The organization has become wildly successful. It's gotten
That's
lots
great.
lots of press. I was on the board up until a year ago, November. I dropped off because the book was going to come out. I also travel a lot,
Hmm.
um, and so I said, okay, I'm going to go. I'm going to leave it to something else. But I still, as a sort of emeritus board member, I'm kept apprised of what's going on. I turned the writing, when I became a board member, I turned the writing over to Greg Norton, who does the coverage for Oregon Wine Press now.
Oh, terrific.
Um,
That's a great
and
story. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, I just love the organization.
absolutely. Neil, we're going to have to do part two because I haven't gotten to
Okay,
half the questions. But I do have to wrap this up. But your book is fantastic for anyone who wants to just dive in. It's kind of like a box of chocolates, but nice wine, a great wine theme. You have so much history and wisdom and knowledge. I highly recommend your book. Great
thank you.
Explications, which has just been published. Where can we find you and your book online, Neil?
So you can just Google me. I'm not hard to find. I have a LinkedIn page that has my contact information.
Okay.
Email is best. I always answer email. I make sure that I pull it out of the spam folder. The book is available worldwide. You can order it at your bookstore. You can. I'd like to give a shout out to Academy du Vin Library, which
Yes.
carries the hardback. Um, it's available on Amazon. You can order it directly from Ingram Spark. So it's not hard
All
to
the
find.
places.
Yep.
Yes. All the online bookstores, and you can go to your local bookseller
And,
too and
and
order it.
order
Yeah.
it. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Neil, this has been such a pleasure. I love connecting with you. We've exchanged emails over the years, but this has been a great conversation. So, best of luck with the book. We have to pick this up, though. There's so many things
Sure.
I still want to ask you. But I'm sure the book will go well. And don't log off just yet, but
Right.
I'll say cheers for now.
Take care.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.